Hi, boys and girls. Miss Robin here. Welcome to another episode of Mobile Music Online. Today we're going to learn about a great composer, Franz Shubert.
Franz Peter Shubert was a composer whose music could be as tender as a lullaby.
Through the night, my songs entreating gently plead with thee.
As thrilling as a national anthem. Or as happy as your favorite game. Franz was born in 1797 in this house, on the outskirts of Vienna in Austria. He was the fourth of 5 children born to a poor schoolmaster and his wife. Franz's father taught his pupils in his own home. In those days, there were no public schools. Father Schubert's salary came from his students' parents, who each paid a small sum of money. A schoolmaster's pay did not amount to very much. Little Franz, along with the other pupils, was taught to read and write in his father's school. As was the custom of that day, all children were taught to read music. Franz learned his music as well as his other lessons very easily. Franz was given lessons on both the violin and piano by his older brother Ignaz. Soon Ignaz had to admit that his little brother could play both instruments better than he. In fact, he played the violin so well that he was often called upon to play that instrument in church. The local choir master began giving singing lessons to Franz. Franz had a beautiful voice. The choir master was an excellent teacher. He taught him singing, piano, and organ, and young Franz learned quickly. The choir master was often heard to say, "Whenever I want to teach that boy something new, I find he knows it already." Because of his musical brilliance, Franz, at the age of 11, was invited to take an examination to enter the Konvikt. The Konvikt was a famous Vienna school, open to a carefully chosen group of boys. In exchange for singing in the Emperor's choir, they earned their room and board and their education, including musical training. This choir performed both at the Royal Palace and the Court Church. Franz was one of several boys taking the examination. While he waited his turn to sing, some other boys, better dressed than he, laughed and jeered at his faded blue smock. They told him he looked like the son of a miller and asked him why he was there. But they soon stopped laughing when they heard his clear, beautiful singing voice, and they were amazed how quickly and easily he answered the musical test questions. Franz was one of 3 boys accepted to study at the Konvikt and to sing in the Imperial Choir. Franz lived at the Konvikt for 4 years, and during that time he suffered many hardships. Because Austria was at war most of this time, food and supplies were scarce. There were only 2 meals served daily at the school, and they were meager and poor. Franz had no money to buy so much as an apple to satisfy his hunger. In winter, the dismal, poorly lighted rooms were extremely cold. But in spite of his physical suffering, Franz was not unhappy. In the midst of his noisy fellow students, he sat at his little table composing sheet after sheet of music. Paper was scarce, so he used any that he could find. He rarely used a piano as he composed, but sometimes he would tap on the table with his fingers as though trying a certain part. This string quartet in B-flat major was one of those early works. One day, an older student came into the room where Franz was trying his compositions on the piano. He had learned of Franz's great interest in composing and furnished the boy with music paper for the rest of his school days. Franz was made the leading violinist in the school orchestra and sometimes acted as the director. His teachers all recognized his musical abilities, and some said that Franz Shubert already knew more about music than they could teach him. Franz was allowed to go to the home of the Emperor's court musician, a famous composer of that day, to take lessons in composition. Because of his musical ability, he had been excused from the strict rule that no student could leave the school alone. Like most people of Vienna, Franz enjoyed watching the Emperor's Imperial Guard on parade. Perhaps his recollection of this impressive scene gave him the inspiration to write his famous Marche Militaire years later. Franz often spent Sunday afternoons at home with his family. In the courtyard in back of their home, he, his father, and two brothers would play string quartets composed by Franz while at school. During his last year at school, Franz composed his first symphony to celebrate the principal's birthday. This symphony was one of 21 brilliant works which he composed during that year. At 17, Franz Shubert began teaching in his father's school. His father had insisted that Franz, like his older brothers, earn a living by becoming a schoolmaster. Franz disliked teaching because it took too much time away from his music. However, he still found time to compose over 300 works, including 150 songs. One of these songs, called The Earl King, is perhaps his most famous. Schubert's friends began to gather in the evenings to hear him play his compositions. Among them were former classmates, other musicians, artists, actors, poets, and writers. As the years passed, this group of talented people increased in number, and they became known as the Schubertians. They were drawn together because of their great admiration for Franz Shubert and his music. When Shubert was 19, he left his father's home. He had decided to give up teaching. He wanted to earn a living as a composer. For the remainder of his life, he lived with first one friend and then another. During these years, Shubert met one of the most famous German singers of the time, Johann Michael Vogel. Vogel was deeply impressed with Schubert's songs, and in the years following sang them again and again in the homes of wealthy Austrians. As a result, Shubert and his music became well known throughout Austria and Germany. Shubert devoted all of his time to music, which seemed to pour out of him. When one piece was done, he began another. Much of the music ended up in drawers and cupboards to be found and published long after his death. He was now 21 years old with no steady income. He had the good fortune to find a position as music teacher to the children of Count Esterhazy. Count Esterhazy was a nobleman whose lands and home were in Hungary. At first, Shubert was very happy with the beautiful woods and rolling hills of the country. However, after a few months, he longed for Vienna and his large circle of friends, so he returned to the city. The following year, he took a trip into Upper Austria with his friend Vogel. The lovely scenery and the pleasure he derived from fishing in the mountain streams may have inspired him to write his famous Trout Quintet. During the same year, one of Schubert's operas was performed in a Vienna theater. When the audience applauded and called for the composer, Shubert refused to go on stage because he did not own proper clothes for the occasion. Shubert wrote several operas, and though much of the music was beautiful, the operas received few performances because the stories were generally unsuitable. Even today, his operas are not well known. When Shubert was 25, he composed his best-known instrumental work, the Unfinished Symphony. This symphony has only 2 movements, while the usual symphony has 4. It was composed as a gift to the town of Graz, which had elected him an honorary member of its musical society. Shubert never heard the symphony played by an orchestra. This most loved and famous of Schubert's orchestral works was first performed 37 years after his death. For some time, Shubert had been in failing health, and early in his 26th year, his illness reached a serious stage. He was placed in a hospital where he spent weeks in recovery. But illness did not keep Shubert from composing more and more musical works. The next year, in early summer, he was again engaged by the Esterházy family and accompanied them to one of their summer homes. He spent 6 months with them. The peacefulness of country life and the sunshine and fresh air helped to restore Shubert to better health. Back in Vienna, at a meeting of the Schubertians, an artist wanted to draw Schubert's portrait. But Shubert was too restless to sit still. Someone gave him a book of Shakespeare's plays, and he became so interested in one of the songs in a play that he proceeded to set it to music. While he composed, the artist drew his portrait. The beautiful song Shubert composed was Hark, Hark, the Lark. Shubert wrote other songs using words from plays by Shakespeare. One of them is the famous song, Who is Sylvia?
Who is Sylvia? What is she? That all our swains commend her.
Schubert's songs were often sung at social gatherings or in concert halls. He wrote more than 600 of them. They are called Lieder, a term that means songs rich and melodic with words that tell a story. Among Schubert's songs is the beautiful composition called The Wanderer. This song expresses the feelings of a man longing to be back home as he wanders from place to place. The Wanderer is typical of the sadness, beauty, and excitement of Schubert's music.
From distant mountains I have come, the veil in fog, the ocean foam, the ocean foam.
In March of 1828, Schubert presented a concert devoted entirely to his own music. Most of the performers were his close friends. The hall was filled with an enthusiastic audience, and the concert was a great success. One of the numbers on the program was the now famous song called Serenade. Schubert wrote this song as a present for a young lady he admired. He was too poor to buy her a gift.
Softly goes my song's entreaty through the night to thee.
In a short while, Schubert's health began to fail again. He went to the home of his brother Ferdinand, who lived in the suburb of Vienna. There in November of 1828, at the age of 31 years, he died. In his short life, Franz Peter Schubert gave the world more than 1,000 musical works. Unfortunately, the people of Schubert's day never heard many of his compositions, since they were not found until after his death. But the recognition that Shubert failed to receive while he was living is now given to him by thousands of admirers. Shubert loved people and gave to them the only thing he had in life, his music. Music as tender as a lullaby, as thrilling as a national anthem, as happy as your favorite game.
Well, that's about all the time we have for now, but we hope that you've enjoyed our lesson for today. See you next time.